Hello, my name is Vanessa Bui. This is also my first time doing this, so it's a little intimidating. I was born, raised, and currently reside on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Lekwungen, Sanik, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. It is important for me to make this acknowledgement as someone who identifies as first-generation Vietnamese, as a youth, as someone who identifies as queer and gender fluid, and who experiences privileges in a plethora of ways, namely being lower middle class, thin, and able-bodied. I make these acknowledgments as a form of transparency so everyone can have a better understanding of where I'm coming from as I stand before you today, as well as because of how long it took me to get here and make these acknowledgments in the first place. I didn't always know I was on stolen land, just as I didn't always know I was Vietnamese or that I was queer and so on, and what these things mean in the context of being a settler on Indigenous land. I'm here today to oppose the rezoning of 105 Keefer. I'm a resident of Strathcona and live a block away from Chinatown. Often we may consider Chinatown as a space for Chinese people, and rightfully so. Because of white supremacy, Chinese immigrants and their families were not allowed to own businesses in parts of present-day Vancouver, let alone live and have homes. Chinatown is a concrete and literal example of the consequences of racism, xeno-antagonism, and white supremacy in action. At the same time, as a Vietnamese person, Chinatown has also been an oasis for East Asian and Southeast Asian folks who share similarities across cultures. Even though I don't speak Cantonese or Mandarin, the shops, the smells, the people, the ways in which people interact are so familiar that I practically feel at home, especially considering that there isn't a similar space or history for Vietnamese people, and especially because some of the businesses in Chinatown are Vietnamese run and owned, and that some residents of Chinatown are Vietnamese too. When we consider the rapid changes of development going on in Chinatown today, we need to fully understand how the new forms of racism, classism, and white supremacy affect multiple communities, not just the Chinese community, which to me makes the rezoning of 105 Keefer all the more devastating as if it wasn't problematic enough. One of the things I do for work is organize a social justice bus tour with youth, and one of the spaces we visit is Chinatown and what used to be Hogan's Alley. We take a busload of 50 people through this neighborhood and throughout the downtown east side to discuss the history of how Chinatown came to be, the 1907 race riots, which were endorsed by the mayor at the time, and the obliteration of Vancouver's only distinct black community as a result of the Georgia Viaduct. It is incredible how many participants on this tour, young and old, new residents, and people who have lived in Vancouver their entire lives, who come up to us at the end of the tour or write in their feedback forms that they were astonished how they had never learned about this history before, that this level of neglect for marginalized communities had ever existed. There are lots of reasons why I oppose the rezoning of 105 Keefer, some of which have been repeated throughout these hearings. Easily, as a taxpayer, it's infuriating that the taxes I pay help maximize BE's profits, and that the importantly small amount of social housing that is proposed is not clearly defined or stated to be rented out to match welfare and pension rates. 105 Keefer will contribute to the ongoing process of gentrification that plagues Chinatown and contribute to the housing crisis we're in the midst of. At the very least, one can say that rezoning 105 Keefer is not a solution, and if it isn't, I don't see why it's even on the table to be discussed in the first place. So of all the varying reasons, one I hope you will take to heart and carry with you tonight is this. In 50 years, when youth, adults, and seniors are on a bus tour to learn about the history of Vancouver, what will the youth tour guides be saying about Chinatown? What will they say about you, existing council and mayor, and the part you played in contributing to its downfall? What reflections will come from the participants who are new residents or who have lived there all their lives? What legacy is reflected when they say, wow, I didn't know that that's how communities were treated back then. I didn't even know there used to be Chinese people here or low-income people here or homeless people here. As someone who has worked on these tours for the past 4 years, who is fascinated by the history of Chinatown, and as someone who is a stakeholder in the future of Chinatown, it is becoming more and more apparent to me that what is happening here now is simply a continuation to what has happened to Chinatown and the East Asian community in the past. The differences are, instead of burning buildings, they are being torn down for redevelopment. Instead of smashing windows, they are being covered up with wooden boarding, for lease signs, and feel-good attempts at looking to promote Chinese heritage. Instead of white people marching down the streets with torches, we have rich, upper and middle-class white folks opening up high-end coffee shops, expensive restaurants, fancy grocery stores, and zones of exclusion. Instead of Chinese people being forced into a community, they are now being forced out, alongside poor, low-income, and disabled people, regardless of ethnicity. If we thought we were past the 1907 race riots and colonization, it can easily be discerned that racism, classism, and white supremacy is alive and well in Vancouver. It's just taken on a different form in 2017. So what are you going to do about it? What side of history will you be on? What do you want youth and people in general to say about you in 50 years? How do you want to be remembered? And more importantly, how will the Chinese and low-income community be talked about? As a distant memory or as a community still in existence 50 years down the road who can remain to tell their own stories? I'd like to aim for the latter, which is why I oppose the rezoning of 105 Keefer, and you should too.
Okay, thank you very much for being here. And we have